Hi, this is Kevin from Passion for the Word. Uh, Today's video is going to be on the age of the universe, age of the Earth. I'm really excited about this, and this is what I've been looking forward to doing for quite some time. We actually did this one a few days ago, and the audio, we had some kind of problem with the audio, some technical difficulties. Today we're working on lighting. Bear with us. My IT person doesn't get paid a whole lot. So
The pay's not good.
it's out of this world.
That's true.
Uh, so we're working on it. Keep us in your prayers. These will get better. A little housekeeping before we actually get into our video. As always, please keep praying for us. Share these videos. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. The notification bell. Do all that stuff that you already know about. We still have plenty of the t-shirts. All sizes are still available. As you can see, our limited edition collector series t-shirts. Any donation over $20 gets you in a t-shirt. Earthquake. Okay, we're going to get right into it. Now before we start this, I want you to open your mind. There's some of the things that I'm going to be saying that might be kind of shocking, because I know for myself these facts were pounded into me from a very early age as if they were unquestioned. There's problems with all this. There's a difference between real science and man's claims. 2,500 years ago, Aristotle said that heavy objects fall faster than light objects. For 2,000 years, this was taught as a undisputed fact. If you went to any college or university over the next 2,000 years after Aristotle made that claim, this was taught as a fact. Right at the point where Galileo decided to actually apply some science to it. What he figured is, if a 10-pound ball falls faster than a 5-pound ball, if you tie two 5-pound balls together, do they fall faster? He did the famous experiment at the Leaning Tower of Pisa and found objects of the same density fall at the same speed, changing everything. The same thing applies to so many other aspects of science. People go on and on saying this is an undisputed fact, even though it's not been tested, it's not been proven. So just look at all these things. I'm going to be pointing out several things that are known in science to be true. When you apply them backwards in time, 6,000 years, it's not a big deal. Anything beyond that, you go back to the millions of years that they're claiming, a lot of these things add up to being very big problems. There may be an answer for some of these, but realize if even one of these claims that I'm going to be showing tonight is irrefutable, it tears apart the millions of years theory. So we're going to start out. There's two basic age theories. The Bible, which shoots for about 6,000 years. Some people will say 9 to 10,000 years, but basically 6,000 years. This is based on going with the genealogies and the lifespans that they give in those, working these numbers backwards. Bishop Ussher wrote a book called The Annals of History, and he comes right down to an actual date and a time. I don't know if that's doable. I haven't actually read his book. I've got it on my shelf. It's on my list of books to read. I'm not going to say you can't date it to the exact time, like you said, until I read his book. I'd be foolish to make that claim without the knowledge. Suffice it to say, the 6,000 year span I think is pretty accurate. Secular mythology, which is what they, National Geographic and the TV, and if you go to college, that's what they teach. They're going to say the universe is 13.8 billion years old. They're going to say the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. They're going to lump most of the stars or most of the planets in our solar system in that 4.5 billion years. Right off the bat, they end up with a problem with this. The first problem is if the visible universe, they claim, is 46.5 billion light years. That's be out in any direction. That means the universe is at least 93 billion light years from one end to the other. If that's the case, and everything in the universe is only 13.8 billion years old, now remember, we're talking only, How did the matter travel that far in only 13.8 billion years? If the matter from the Big Bang traveled at the speed of light, which matter is not able to travel that fast, then from the point of the Big Bang, and let's just assume Earth was the center of the Big Bang just for the sake of argument, nothing in the universe should be more than 13.8 billion light years away from us. This is the problem. Now, for them, they've come up with a great cover for it. The mechanism that they've come to try to cover for this, it's kind of creative. It's pretty brilliant. They say that the matter didn't travel that far, but that the universe was inflated. It's not that this point and this point got farther apart. The space between them spread out. Okay, it's kind of far-fetched, but is there any truth to it? I think that this actually points to an even bigger problem for them and a greater victory for us. Because if that's the case, there is some evidence for it. Isaiah 42:5 says, "Thus saith God, the Lord, He that created the heavens and stretched them out." Stretched out the heavens. "I have made the earth and created man upon it. I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens." Another one in Isaiah. "And forgettest the Lord thy Maker, that hath stretched forth the heavens, and laid the foundations of the earth." One more, Jeremiah. "He hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom, and hath stretched out the heavens by his discretion." Okay, now the amazing thing is, these were both written about 2,500 years ago. How did they know that the heavens had been stretched out? NASA, our top scientists, just now figured this out. So this whole stretching out the heavens, actually, it points right back to the Bible, and it forces the question, how did they know? They knew it 2,500 years ago. The top scientists, just now, with all the equipment, they certainly didn't have the equipment. They had to get it by supernatural knowledge from God. So there was a stretching out of the heavens. What part that actually takes in the whole scheme of age, I just find it fascinating that their mechanism, they come up with a mechanism to save a bad theory. In the process of coming up with it, all they did is it points to confirming the Bible. So let's actually get into some age problems. The first thing we're going to look at are limiting factors. If you were a deep sea diver and came across a sunken ship and got really lucky and found some treasure, and you found coins with the ages of 1750, 1710, and 1695, which date dates the wreck? 1750 tells you when the boat sank. It had to sink after that date. It couldn't have sank before that time. Coin wouldn't be in there. So we have a limiting factor. This doesn't tell us that it couldn't have been 1760, 1780. It could have been any of that, but it could not have been 1710. This coin at 1750 is a limiting factor, won't allow it to be older. We're going to look at some other limiting factors that limit how old it can be. The first one we're going to look at is human population. July 24th, 1999, Star Tribune in Minneapolis, Minnesota, ran the headline, "Last weekend, the world's population topped 6 billion. Today, as of April of 2019, 7.7 billion people worldwide. And we've got a chart here that shows the population of the world. Some of these are estimated, but these numbers all take into effect war, famine, all these factors are taken into effect for these numbers. Note that in 1985 we have 5 billion people. Only 15 years later we jump up to 6. Clear back in 1800, 200 years earlier, we're at 1 billion. It only took 200 years to go from 1 billion to 6 billion. The number slows down dramatically as we go back in time. The numbers get smaller. The growth rate is exponential. It drops down to virtually zero, conveniently enough, right about the time of Noah's flood. Now, the Encyclopedia Britannica, you all remember encyclopedias, that's what we had before the internet to look up information. Encyclopedia Britannica certainly was not a pro-creation organization. They tried to deal with facts. But they wrote, the current rate of population growth worldwide is 1.7% annually. It does not sound like much, but when applied to a large and growing larger population, the results of compound growth can be amazing. If the population growth rate were charted backwards in time from today, at a slower rate of only 0.5% annually, less than 1/3 of today's actual rate of 1.7. So what they've done here, they're actually slowing the rate of increase down. This works against the creation account and actually works in favor of the old age. But the result of that, slowing the rate of growth down that much, results in a handful of people alive 4,500 years ago. Just as Noah's post-flood world populations would have been. On the other hand, consider if the population growth rate were extremely slow pace of only 0.01% annually, a ridiculously generous 1/170th of today's actual growth. So we're going to take the growth rate that we have now, which is back here at 1.7%. We're going to take it and change it to 0.01%, 1/170th of the actual rate. At that rate, starting 1 million years ago, as the evolutionists proposed, an adventurous monkey and his wife stood up and were considered people. So from 1 million years ago, you got just 2 people starting with that speed. It would mean a doubling of the number of people every 7,000 years. So it would take at that rate 7,000 years to go from 2 people to 4 people. Another 7,000, so 14,000 years later, you finally have 8 people. At that slow rate for 1 million years, you have 142 doublings. At that super slow rate, today, we would have this number of people on the planet. Remember, we've got 7 billion. 7 billion would be here. All that. That's a 10 followed by 43 zeros. I have no idea how to pronounce that number if it even has a name. Obviously, we don't have that many people here. And that's at a rate that's ridiculously slow. This is a limiting factor. Now, one of the main things that they use for the age of the Earth is the geologic column. The geologic column was conceived by Charles Lyell in 1830 in his book Principles of Geology. He didn't have any dating methods to use. This was pretty much a figment of his imagination. There was no radiometric dating. There was no way to do this. He just put the age in there. Now, he didn't have the animals in there. Even most of these weren't even dinosaurs. The word dinosaur hadn't even been invented yet. This is a later chart. He just made up the names. Lyell said his goal was to free the science from Moses. Generally, true science doesn't have a goal besides seeking the truth. He wasn't seeking the truth. He was trying to get rid of the Bible. He was very anti-Christian. He made up facts to support his anti-Christian stance. The geologic column, does it exist? The Creation Technical Journal in 1999 showed, unfortunately, no such column exists. It's estimated that if you had a geologic column, the entire thing in one place, it would be several miles thick. The geologic column is the Bible for the evolutionist. It can only be found one place in the world, the textbooks. And we're going to talk about some different radiometric dating methods. We're going to start with carbon-14. Now, carbon-14 is only found in living things. It's no good for dating just a rock. It's got to be something that was once alive. As we live and breathe, we bring in carbon-14. When we die, we can no longer bring in more carbon-14. So then we lose it. We lose it at a rate of half of whatever we have is lost every 5,730 years. That's what a half-life is. For example, 5,000. If I were to die today, right now, I've got 100% of my carbon-14. 5,730 years from now, I'd have 50% of it. 11,460 years, I'd have 25% of it, and on and on. You get to 20 half-lives for carbon-14, you're back 114,600 years. And you have 0.0000953,674% of the amount of carbon-14 left in you. Let's just say there's none. Okay, that number is so minuscule, there's none left at that age. And that's why they generally say carbon-14 isn't very good much past 40 or 50,000 years. I agree with that. It wouldn't be good, and there's actually problems even before that. They've carbon-14 tested living things that were shown to be dead for several thousand years. They've done carbon-14 tests of two ends of the same animal and come up with 25,000 year differences. It's not a great dating method. You may be familiar with the name Mary Schweitzer. She was the first scientist, to my knowledge, that discovered soft tissue in dinosaur bones. Bob Enyart has a radio program, and he called Jack Horner. Now, Jack Horner is one of the top consultants for the Jurassic Park movies. Jack Horner had access to these soft tissue samples. Bob Enyart wanted to carbon test them, carbon-14 test them. He offered to pay all the expenses to do one sample of the soft tissue plus any 4 other samples of Jack Horner's choosing. So they were able to get 5 pieces carbon-14 sampled at Bob Enyart's expense, and Bob Enyart was going to offer an $8,000 grant to the museum. Jack Horner said no. He bumped it up to $10,000. Jack Horner said, we've got nothing to gain by this. Isn't trying to find the truth part of science? Finally offered $20,000, and Jack Horner said, I'll get back to you on that. Never took it. When he said we have nothing to gain by it, what he really meant, their religion, their secular mythology would be called into question. He was afraid they'd find carbon-14. And from the chart before, consider dinosaurs were supposed to go extinct 65 million years ago. If they found any carbon-14 in that, this is actually only after a little over 100,000 years. I can't imagine how minuscule that amount would be at 65 million years. If there was any carbon-14, it would destroy their millions of years. That's what he meant by we have nothing to gain by this. Someone else was willing to pay the bills for science. Science didn't want anything to do with it. At a symposium in 1970, it was said, if a C14 date supports our theories, we put it in the main text. If it does not entirely contradict them, we put it in a footnote, and if it's completely out of date, we just drop it. That's not how real science is done. You don't get rid of the data you don't like. DNA half-life is 520 years, so about roughly 10% of what carbon-14 is. The oldest on record, that as far as what they say, human DNA is 40,000 years old, or 76 half-lives. The oldest DNA total, of all species, is Ursus denegiri, which would be a type of extinct bear. It's supposed to be 300,000 years old, or 575 half-lives. Now remember, 20 half-lives is this astronomical number, 0.00009, and a bunch of other numbers. That's 20 half-lives. 40,000-year-old human DNA is going to have 76 half-lives. Divide it by 2 for each one of those. I started with my calculator. It ran out of space. It couldn't do it. It went to negative and then to a power, and I stopped at that point. We're talking such minuscule amounts. The problem is not the DNA. It's there. They found it. The problem is the 40,000-year-old age or the 300,000 years old age. but they will not break from those numbers. Those numbers they have to support their theory of evolution. The science proves them wrong. There shouldn't be any DNA. I said, after 20 half-lives, that's the percentage you got. We're talking more than 3 times that. We're talking 3.5 times that amount for the human DNA at 40,000. As far as radiometric dating, it works on the same principle of half-lives, but we're talking, instead of being carbon-14, we're talking radioactive elements that break down over time. One of the most popular ones is potassium argon. Potassium breaks down, potassium of a certain type breaks down to an argon of a certain type. It has a half-life of 1.3 billion years. So they use this for dating older things, and because it's radioactive, it's good for things that aren't living, like just conventional rocks. Now we know for a fact, those of us old enough, we remember it happening. Mount St. Helens erupted on 5/18/1980. We know this. This is not in dispute. This is solid. This is as solid of a fact as you can get. They potassium argon dated some rocks. Now they usually will try to ask before you send them in for dating, what your supposed dates, what you're looking for. They didn't give them that information up front, because if they knew they were from Mount St. Helens, they wouldn't have touched them. They just had them carbon or potassium argon date these without having any information ahead of time. Just hand the rock, test it. The range was from 340,000 years ago to 1.3 billion years old for rocks that we know started in 1980. This is one of their dating methods. It's just been destroyed. It's no dating method. Topsoil. When erosion is factored in, topsoil accumulates at a rate of about 1 inch every 300 to 1,000 years. The global average depth of topsoil is 8 inches. If the Earth is millions of years old, where's all the topsoil going? Erosion's factored into this, so you can't say it's all washing into the sea. That's factored in. So why don't we have, tens of feet, hundreds of feet of topsoil by now? It's not there. This is another limiting factor. We're going to go out into outer space now. There's plenty of evidence here. About every 30 years, a star is observed exploding. This is called a nova or a supernova, not a Chevy. Astronomers have observed that about every 30 years, a star dies and explodes into a supernova. If the universe is billions of years old, how come there are less than 300 supernovas or dead stars? There should be several 100 million of them. Are the stars wrong, or is the old Earth, the evolution theory, wrong? Another limiting factor. If stars evolve, as they claim, star bursts should equal star deaths. Novas and supernovas are star deaths. Many have been observed. Where is the evidence for star bursts? There's plenty of stars out there. It's been estimated that there are enough stars for every individual on Earth, all 7 billion of us, to own 11 trillion each. It's amazing the number of stars out there. The deeper we look, the more we find. Now, this limited amount of knowledge or evidence doesn't stop them from making ridiculous claims. Back up here. Scrolled a little too fast. You probably can't, if you're on your phone, you probably won't be able to read this, but if you're on a computer, I think this will show up. But right here, this is a school science book. It says, new stars are constantly being born in clouds of gas and dust, such as these columns in the Eagle Nebula. They're not saying they might be. They're not saying we think, we hope, we believe. They're stating this as fact. This is a school book that your kid might be using or might have used. They're stating this as fact. What's the fact? The silent embarrassment of modern astrophysics is that we do not know how even a single one of these stars managed to form. That's the truth. They don't teach the truth. Now, this is what they claim to be. The textbooks will say how stars break down, the timeline of it. Stars are rated by color. Color is supposed to represent how big the star is, how hot it is. A red supergiant, that's one of the bigger ones. Those are blue stars. On the chart over here, and there again, if you're on your phone, you may not be able to read this. If you're on your computer, I hope you can. But their chart says they know, and they don't claim that they're speculating. They know this. A red giant or any large mass in a few billion years turns into a white dwarf. The smaller ones take longer. The sun the size of ours, or a star the size of our sun, they say 10 billion years to a white dwarf. A smaller one could be 100 billion. But the big ones, the red giants, the blue stars, a few billion years. They're making this as a solid claim. This isn't. There's no hint that they're admitting that this is speculation. They teach us as fact. Let's look at some facts, though. Egyptian hieroglyphics from 2000 BC described Sirius as red. Cicero in 50 BC stated Sirius was red. Seneca, the Roman philosopher or historian, described Sirius as being redder than Mars. Ptolemy listed Sirius as one of the 6 red stars in 150 AD. Today, it is a white star binary. Textbooks say it should take billions of years for this to happen. It's taken less than 2,000. There's another star, FG Sagittae, that was discovered. I don't know that it's one that we can see with our naked eye. I think it's strictly a telescope with a name like that, most likely. When they discovered it, it's definitely a blue star. Blue are one of the bigger ones, so they don't take as long. I mean, a few billion years. 36 years later, it was changed to a yellow star. That should have taken billions of years. We know it happened in 36. How do scientists measure the ages of stars? We can also find absolute ages by comparing a star's color and brightness with those in stellar evolution models. Obviously, their models don't work. We've seen factually, we know factually, they don't work. We've seen stars change in a fraction. I mean, what fraction is 2,000 from a billion? It's, you figure it out. The sun is losing 5 million tons of matter per second. Since 1836, more than 100 different observers at the Royal Greenwich Observatory and the U.S. Naval Observatory have made direct visual measurements that suggest that the sun's diameter is shrinking at a rate of about 0.1% each century, or about 5 feet per hour. This rate is no problem for a 6,000-year-old Earth. It's not even going to be noticeable. The sun, working back, because if it's getting smaller by 5 feet every year, it's reasonable to say if you go back in time, you'd add 5 feet every year. Or actually, it's every second. About 5 feet every hour. We'll get it right. This is why I use PowerPoints. Keep my facts straight. I can refer back to them. So 5 feet every hour. We're losing that. So if we go back in time, we can add 5 feet every hour. You go back 158 million years ago. This is what the heyday of the dinosaurs. I mean, they went extinct 65 million years ago. If I recall, I believe they consider the beginning of the age of dinosaurs around 250 million years ago. So we've had dinosaurs for 1 million years at this point. Going backwards in time, the sun would be touching the Earth. At that rate, the sun would have absorbed Venus and Mercury. Just going back 100,000 years, the sun would be twice its current size. Going back only 50,000 years ago, the sun would have been big enough for the oceans to boil. You get all this talk about climate change and everything and how precarious things are. You can't make the sun a whole lot bigger before everything goes haywire. They've got a problem only 50,000 years ago. How well do you think life would do with boiling hot seas? They're all concerned about the climate change rate that they're worried about covers like a half a degree over 50 years of ocean temperatures is going to kill us all. I think boiling seawater, boiling oceans would be a much bigger threat than a half a degree over 50 years. They've got a problem. as far as the other planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune are all, we now know they have rings. Everybody knows of Saturn, but the other ones have been more recently discovered. With the way what rings are composed of, how the stability in all the models that we've done, they should not last more than 20,000 years. This is not a problem on a 6,000-year-old solar system, but if they're going to try to save 4.5 billion years, they've got some explaining to do, Lucy. Before we get into them, we're going to cover what's called the inverse square law. This is going to be important to know. The force of attraction between two objects is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. You got it? It's not as complicated as it sounds. Now, first of all, the inverse square law affects things like gravity and light, magnetism, things of that nature. What it basically means, if the distance is cut in 1/3, so if, let's say you've got this distance, if it was out here, if you cut it down to 1/3, the force of attraction between the two objects is 9 times greater. You take the 1/3, you invert it to 3/1, and then you square it. 3/1 is 3, 3 squared is 9. So you cut the distance, if the distance is 1/3 of what it was, the attraction is 9 times. So it's an exponential increase in strength. Remember, this works on light, this works on gravity, this works on magnets. I'm not sure, I can't remember what else, but in this case, we're going to be talking about gravity. The moon is, every year, it gets about roughly 1.5 inches farther away from the Earth as it orbits. It makes perfectly good sense. We have no reason to believe that if you go back in time, every year you went back in time, the moon would be 1.5 inches closer. It's perfectly logical. If we know it's going away at that rate, we can extrapolate backwards and add that 1.5 inches for every year. For 6,000 years, it's no big deal. You go back 1 billion years. Now remember, they say the moon and the Earth are 4.5 billion years old. So we're not even going 1/4 of the way back. But the effect of gravity at 1 billion years would have been so great, the moon could have never gotten away. It would have been crashed into the Earth. This is a major limiting factor. The evolution of the lunar semi-major axis presents the well-known timescale problem. The lunar orbit collapses only a little over 1 billion years ago. This was in the Astronomical Journal, volume 108, number 5, November 1994, page 1954. Now, of course, the moons control the tides. And the moon's gravity controls the tide. You bring the moon back in 1.5 inches a year, you get back to the time of the dinosaurs, we've got a considerable increase in our gravity and a much higher tide. At some point, you're going to have serious problems with this. Walt Brown's book, this is one of the best books on this, on so many topics of a young Earth. I highly recommend it. I hope to be carrying it at some point in the future. We're not there yet. He goes into greater detail. He's got a math formula. If you like math, he's got formulas that'll make your head spin. He goes through and shows a formula for predicting the height of these tidal waves. And he shows waves as high as 8 miles, the tide coming in being 8 miles deep. You bring the moon in close enough. And that's during a time when we had life on Earth. The title of the book is In the Beginning by Walt Brown, one of the best books that there is. There's another book called The Evolution Handbook that covers a ton of this stuff too. Another book I hope to carry at some point. I've already moved on. So pause, unpause. Uranium-236 and thorium-230. These are both radioactive elements that are found on the moon. When we went to the moon, we brought these rocks back. We found these elements. Big deal. Because of radioactive decay, these rocks should not be present on the moon if it was more than 50,000 years old. They should have broken down. They might have still been uranium, but uranium-236 should not have been discovered on the moon. It should have broken down past it. Remember, we never see When you look at the periodic table, we never see elements going to larger numbers. We only see them breaking down to smaller numbers. Uranium-236, thorium-230 should not exist on the moon if it's less than 5, or if it's more than 50,000 years old. Just another limiting factor. This is not a problem if we're going to say that everything is 6,000 years old. We want to say that the moon is 4.5 billion years old. We got a problem. Now, the next big science thing we're going to discover or talk about is parallax trigonometry. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to do it. I struggle with it myself. But just the principle of it was all we're going to cover. Now, with parallax trigonometry, you've got sine, cosine, and tangent. And basically what you're doing is you're trying to find the distance to an object you can't get to, and it's fairly reliable. You have to know this point here, and this point here, and the exact distance between those 2 points. Then you point an object, or point a point to the object you're trying to figure the distance. You measure this angle, then you measure this angle. And if you know precisely this point and this point, the distance between them, and the precise angle here and here, you can mathematically figure out where the points will, the lines will connect. I'm losing my thought. Where they'll connect, and you'll be able to pretty accurately predict that distance. Now, hold on to that because we're going to be coming back to that. Short period comets are losing material and have a life expectancy of less than 10,000 years. This creates a problem. We still got them. If everything is 4.5 billion years old to 13 point, where are the comets coming from? Less than 10,000 years is not a problem on a 6,000-year-old universe. So, like they do in so many things, I was going to mention with Mary Schweitzer, she found the soft tissue. I'll say this right now real quick. She was looking at bones. She happened to look inside the bones, something they very seldom do because they're so valuable. She found soft tissue inside the dinosaur bone. This tears apart, how can something remain soft tissue for 65 million years? Rather than acknowledge that there might be a problem of 65 million years, they made up a theory that iron would do it, that iron would preserve it. Well, they propped up a bad theory with another bad theory. That was the sample that Bob Enyart wanted to test. Now, there's a great man by the name of Mark Armitage who got fired from his job because he also discovered soft tissue, won a huge settlement because he was wrongly fired, and he started, I believe it's the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute. You can find him on, if you look up Mark Armitage. He's got great things out there. He's really, with microscopes and everything, looking at, just found some amazing discoveries. He's found individual blood cells in dinosaurs. He's been able to look at the valves in the blood vessels. Amazing stuff, but I digress. So here we've got comets can't last more than 10,000 years. In 1950, based on a study of the orbits of several long-period comets, the Dutch astronomer Jan Oort proposed, maybe, or hoped, wished, prayed, that a great spherical shell of comets existed at the remote frontiers of the solar system to replace the ones that burn out. Better statistics, in more recent years have supported the existence of the Oort cloud and put it at a distance of 2,000 to 50,000 astronomical units. Now, if you're on your phone, you probably aren't going to be able to see this real well, but if you're on your computer, you might be able to see it, but we'll have other stuff, so don't worry if you can't. Imagine this shell being the Oort cloud. It's not like an orbit. It was a complete shell. This level here, deep inside, that's the planetary region. So this is that far expanded outward. Now you may be wondering what an astronomical unit is. We'll get to that. No one has ever seen the Oort cloud. It's hard to see a comet 1 astronomical unit from the Earth. Remember, we're looking at 2,000 to 50,000 away. Oort never saw the Oort cloud. Oort proposed a cloud of comets surrounding the solar system based on mathematical errors, and I'm going to add wishful thinking. Now, what an astronomical unit is, it's just an arbitrary measurement really handy in the solar system. It's just the distance from the sun to the earth. It happens to be 8 light minutes. It takes light 8 minutes to get from the sun to the earth. It's 93 million miles. It's just an arbitrary point of measurement, very handy in the solar system. Using parallax trigonometry, they can figure from the sun, Mercury is 0.4 astronomical units from the sun, Venus is 0.7, obviously because we are the measurement, Earth is 1, Mars is 1.5, Jupiter 5.2, 9.5, 19.2, 32, 30.2, Pluto is 39.5 astronomical units from the sun. Now, to get a bigger base, remember the Oort cloud is 2,000 astronomical units at the minimum. To get it for parallax trigonometry, we're putting both these together now. To get a bigger base, we, instead of just taking 2 spots on the Earth, we take the Earth when it's at one side of the orbit and take one measurement. 6 months later, we take the other one. And that's how we measure distances in space. Now remember, we've got to know the precise distance here and then measure the exact angle as it relates to this point. Try to remember where you were 6 months ago exactly. I think this is pretty tough. Now this might work in some of the smaller numbers, but you get out here, this will be to measure a point somewhere out into the distance. Pluto, remember, is 39 astronomical units from the sun and cannot be seen without a powerful telescope. Seeing a comet at 50,000 astronomical units, impossible. The Oort cloud conveniently is so far out, there'd never be any hope of discovering it. I remember back in, I think it was 76, they sent out the Voyager satellite. It just a year or so ago, I think it was, made it past Pluto. It's been traveling all this time. It just now got past 39 astronomical units. Conceivably, it'll never reach the Oort cloud. It's so far out that there can be no evidence to deny it. That's pretty convenient. Please don't mind the dog. Now, this is something I find very fascinating when it comes to showing the size of the universe, the immense size. There happens to be 63,360 inches in a mile. Just by random chance, there are 63,249 or 41 astronomical units in a light year. So if we make a scale of 1 inch equals 1 astronomical unit, then 1 mile equals 1 light year. On this scale, the sun would be about 1 millimeter. The average grain of sand is 2 millimeters. That tells you how tiny it is. The Earth would be what's called 1 micrometer, or 0.001 millimeters. Dust, smaller than dust. But this is our on our scale here. Now remember, with parallax trigonometry, the base of our triangle, the biggest we could get using our scale here of 1 inch equals 1 inch is an astronomical unit. The biggest base we could get is 2 inches. At this level, Pluto would be 39.5 inches away. That's pretty reasonable to go. The Oort cloud at the closest would be 2,000 feet away, or a football field and a half, 166 feet. That's not a football field. Yeah, no. 166 feet out. To, if I remember right, 50,000 worked out to, I think it was 2,000 feet. Don't remember. But either way, the Oort cloud is an astronomical distance away. The closest star on this scale is Alpha Centauri, 4.5 light years away. Now remember, our base is 2 inches. Now imagine trying to do parallax trigonometry. You get your base 2 inches. You're going to look at a point out that way and then measure the distance. The closest star if our base is 2 inches, is 4.5 miles away. So when they start talking about distances in space, they're really stretching it. They may go with redshift, but redshift is a theory. There are other things that could be causing this. We won't get into that right now. Let's keep moving on. Magnets lose strength over time. Scientific fact. The Earth's magnetic field is getting weaker. We have lost 14% of our magnetism since 1835. We know this to be true. The rate of loss is growing exponentially. We're losing it faster than we were then. Data going back almost 200 years indicates a half-life of 1,400 years. So every 1,400 years, our magnetism's cut in half. At that rate, 7,000 years ago, the magnetic field would be 32 times stronger than today. Not a problem for a young Earth. 20,000 years ago. Now, this is not a problem for a young Earth. This is becoming a problem for the old Earth, for the 4.5 billion year old Earth. Just 20,000 years ago, the magnetism, because it's an energy, the joule heat would be enough to liquefy the Earth. That's a problem. That's a big problem. 1 million years ago. Now this is dinosaurs. By that reckoning, dinosaurs would have been extinct 64 million years. This would have been when they believed man was first starting to walk. You go backwards, increasing the magnetism at the rate we're losing it today. The Earth would have had more magnetism than all the objects in the universe today combined, and the Earth would have been vaporized. Now, they have a defense mechanism that they use. What they say is that the poles flip. It gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and then north becomes south and south becomes north. They propose that this happens up to 5 times every million years. Now, the problem is migrating animals use the magnetic field to migrate on. 5 times every million years, you'd have a mass extinction of everything migrating, because the birds leaving Alaska to fly south for the winter, if the pole flipped, they'd head to the North Pole and they'd die. All of them. All the birds flying south to escape the winter would fly north and freeze to death. 5 times every million years. They got a problem. This is not a problem for the young Earth. It's a huge problem for the old Earth. They come up with ideas to cover these things, but we've all told a lie. You ever told a lie, got kind of caught, and rather than admitting it, you told another lie to cover it, and then you get caught there. It's kind of what they keep trying to cover up. This doesn't work, so instead of admitting that we were wrong, we'll just come up with something new to add on to it, and something new to add on to it. We'll say that iron can cause soft tissue to last 65 million years. We'll say the poles magically flip rather than the magnetism getting too weak. Jupiter's moon Ganymede has a strong magnetic field. Magnetic fields are generated by the liquid motion of molten metal inside. Ganymede should have cooled solid billions of years ago. There's the same problem when they discovered, they went by Mercury. They expected, with the first satellite, they expected no magnetic field. They found a very strong magnetic field. These things all point to a young Earth. Another one that we're going to look at, the Earth is slowing down in its rotation. Not just the orbit, but in its rotation. That's what they have, what they call a leap second. Because the Earth is slowed down, they've got to add a second. They've done this several times in the past. It goes about 1 second every 2 years. Now, if you go backwards with this, adding that second instead of taking it away, you add it. It doesn't cause a problem in 6,000 years. But if you add 1 second every 2 years, you have 5.7 extra days per year 1 million years ago. You have 855 extra days 150 million years ago, or you have a year that takes 1,220 days. Now, the orbit would be the same speed. It's the speed that the Earth is rotating. The Earth's spin 150 million years ago would be 3 times what it is today. An entire day from sunrise to sunset back to sunrise would be about 7 hours. It's spinning pretty quick. This would mess up all kinds of things. The spin of the Earth causes a Coriolis effect. This is what drives our wind currents and our ocean currents. Imagine, I couldn't find the math for this, but imagine what the currents would be in the ocean. Imagine what the wind speeds would be if the Earth was spinning 3 times faster. I think we got some problems. And this would have been, I said 3 times faster, right in the middle of the heyday of the dinosaurs. All these limiting factors, this is by no means an exhaustive list. It's just, I had to stop somewhere. There's plenty of others. Some of these may have answers. I won't pretend that every one of these is without an answer. But it only takes one of these limiting factors to be 100% undeniable truth, to break down their 4.5 billion year old Earth. Only one of these has to be the solid truth. There may be explanations for some of these, but I guarantee there's not an explanation for all of these. The Bible is right. You can trust it. When you read your Bible, you can know you are reading the Word of God. There are things in that Bible that could not be there had God not been involved. Look at Isaiah. Look at Jeremiah. How did they know the heavens were stretched out when our best scientists using the best technology available just now found this out? They knew it 2,500 years ago in a desert. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for putting up with my dogs. If you can hear them bark, keep us in your prayers. Keep liking, keep sharing, keep doing all that stuff. Thank you, and God bless.